If you were able to take the smooth vocals of Iron Maiden, the in-your-face brooding metal and hard partying ways of Black Sabbath, with a sprinkle of the epic guitar riffs of Led Zeppelin, into a rock and roll blender, the result may be close to the band that would redefine the face of music in the early 1980s. A band that became so massive that in 2013, they became the first musical act to ever perform on every continent when they performed live in Antarctica. A band whose hard partying ways and love of Jägermeister helped usher in an age of hard partying rock stars. But how do you get to be known as one of the biggest musical acts to ever exist? Well, the answer is by putting out consistently rocking music. That's how. But the real question is, do they still rock? Do the cool kids still listen to them? Well, let's find out. What the f*** happened to Metallica?
Napster. Sharing's only fun when it's not your stuff.
But to truly understand what the f*** happened to Metallica, we must begin at the beginning, and the beginning began in 1981, Los Angeles, when drummer Lars Ulrich put an ad in the local paper that said, looking for other metal musicians to jam with. One person to answer the ad was guitarist and vocalist James Hetfield, and thus, Metallica was officially born. Not long after, guitarist Dave Mustaine would join the band and they would record their first track, Hit the Lights. This would lead Metallica to their first ever gig on March 14th, 1982, with newly hired bassist Ron McGovney. That gig proved to be quite successful, which led Metallica to be invited to open for the touring British band Saxton for one show on their 1982 US tour. And by late 1982, the band had recorded their first demo album, Power Metal. But all was not right with the band. Hetfield, Ulrich, and Mustaine were not impressed with McGovney's bass playing, saying that they didn't feel he contributed to the band. So one fateful night, Lars and James went and saw the band Trauma at the Whiskey A Go-Go Club in West Hollywood, where they were absolutely blown away by the band's bassist, Cliff Burton. By May of that year, the band was ready to record their demo album. Unfortunately, at the time, the band seemed to think that Dave Mustaine liked to party a bit too much, leading to many angry, drunken nights. Because it's rock and roll. This led the band to kick Mustaine out after he had helped write many new songs. They would bring in Exodus guitarist Kirk Hammett to replace him.
When we would get drunk, they would get silly and I would get really violent. And violent people and silly people don't mix when they're inebriated.
With Hammett in place, the band was able to record their first album, which they titled Metal Up Your Ass. But they were convinced to change the name to a more marketable title, Kill 'Em All, which is still not that great. This album, Kill 'Em All, would sell 17,000 copies in its first year, before going on to sell over 4.5 million worldwide. Kill 'Em All was not a massive success out of the gate, but it built up enough of a fan base that the band was able to start selling out underground clubs with their groundbreaking, fast-paced thrash metal sound. It was like, bam, bam, yeah, oh, just rockin' stuff, yeah! Our ears had never been rocked that hard. By 1984, Metallica was ready to record their second album, heading to Lars' home country of Denmark to record Ride the Lightning. The album, Ride the Lightning, would initially be another low-selling affair, at first, until the band signed with mega label Elektra Records, who would re-release the album, which would allow Ride the Lightning to be certified 6 times platinum. In 1986, the band would release their third album, Master of Puppets, which would become their first huge hit, becoming their first album to be certified gold before selling over 8 million albums worldwide, and has become regarded as one of the most influential albums ever recorded. Not just metal albums, but albums of music in general. And then, tragedy struck. On the evening of December 27th, 1986, while the band was in the middle of the European leg of their Damage Incorporated tour, the 4 members of the band, Lars, James, Kurt, and Cliff, decided to draw cards to determine which bunk on the tour bus each person would sleep in that night. Cliff Burton won the game and chose to take Kurt Hammett's bunk. In the middle of the night, when all the members were asleep, the bus was involved in an accident, which caused Cliff Burton to be violently thrown out the window, with the bus rolling over and landing on top of him. Metallica's bassist, Cliff Burton, was dead at just 24 years old. The band didn't know how to continue, but ultimately agreed that Cliff would never want them to lose the drive that he was part of. He would not want the music to stop. And you know what? The music never did. The band would remain close to Cliff's family, while his father, Ray Burton, would be a staple at Metallica concerts until his death at the age of 94 in 2020. So Metallica would begin the audition process for a new bassist, and ultimately landed on Jason Newsted. Back in the studio, the band would put together the 598 EP Garage Days Revisited, featuring cover songs that would later be released on the band's 3.3 million album-selling Garage Incorporated, released in 1998. But this particular EP, which stands for Extended Play, was merely just a stepping stone for their next feature album, ... and Justice for All, which featured such iconic tracks as Harvester of Sorrow and One, which is widely recognized as one of the greatest music videos ever made. The album, and Justice for All, would be their first to chart on the top 10, topping out at spot 6 on the Billboard 100 charts, and would go on to sell over 10 million albums worldwide, while also netting these metal icons their first Grammy win, when One won. It took home the award for Best Metal Performance, an award that they would win 3 years in a row, with the second win coming from their cover of Queen's Stone Cold Crazy. That third Grammy win in a row would come from the band's 5th studio album, simply known as Metallica, or as it's commonly known as the Black Album. This would be the record that would take Metallica from just a popular band into the stratosphere as one of the greatest bands to ever exist in any genre, with epic tracks such as Enter Sandman, Sad But True, Wherever I May Roam, in addition to daring new musical stylings such as The Unforgiven and Nothing Else Matters.
No, nothing else matters.
The Black Album redefined an entire genre, and in doing so, became one of the highest-selling albums of all time, and one of only 4 albums to spend over 700 weeks on the Billboard 200 charts, selling nearly 20 million albums worldwide. So, what do you do after you release a highly successful album? Well, you tour, and the band would take the next 3 years to tour around the world, including the now infamous August 8th, 1992 concert where they co-headlined with Guns N' Roses, when James Hetfield was confused about where the pyrotechnics were going to be on the stage, which caused him to walk head first into a 12-foot high flame. James was suffering from 2nd and 3rd degree burns upon his entire upper body. For most, that would be the end of the road for the tour, but Hetfield vowed to continue the tour, and just 17 days later, he would be back on stage, singing his hit songs and touring with his band of buddies. But he did have to have another guitarist fill in for him as he was healing, but he could still sing la 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 la. After headlining Woodstock 1994, That's the one that didn't turn into a riot and was burnt to the ground. The band would step back into the recording studio for their next album, Load. This album would court controversy for several reasons. First, when the band re-emerged, they had cut their iconic long locks, and they wore eye makeup, and no longer looked like the thrash metal pioneers that they were. They were kind of like almost a pop act. Another reason why there would be a controversy would be that the album seemed to feature a softer edge to their music that the fans weren't used to. And last, but certainly not least, Metallica had been known for their iconic illustrated cover art, but for Load, the band decided to go in a very different direction, enlisting controversial photographer Andres Serrano to concoct an image titled Blood and Semen 3, which, as you guessed, is a mixture of blood and you know. Ugh. And just like this blood and semen, the reactions to this album were mixed. The band, Metallica, actually recorded enough new music for a double album, resulting in 1997's Reload, which again featured the cover art from that controversial photographer. But this time, he only mixed blood with urine, so there's that. The album would again receive mixed reviews, even though it features two phenomenal tracks, The Memory Remains and Fuel, so you gotta love the album for that.
Give me fuel, give me fire, give me that which I desire.
Then came 1999, which would see Metallica do what no metal band had done before, collaborate with a symphony to create a whole new experience for metal fans. The resulting album was the amazing S&M, which is short for Symphony and Metallica. The following year, Metallica would again take on an entirely new endeavor when they agreed to craft a new song for a feature film. The song was titled I Disappear, and was featured on the Mission Impossible 2 soundtrack, which every cool kid on the block had. While recording demos for the song, Metallica began noticing incomplete versions of the song were being leaked online, which they were able to trace back to the file-sharing service Napster. This resulted in the band taking legal action against the service, citing copyright infringement. Unfortunately, this case has become something that most people would know Metallica for, as it was a massive headline-grabbing case. But ultimately, what the case boiled down to was that the band was upset that their unfinished version of the song was on the internet. Combine that with the fact that even though Metallica is one of the most successful bands to ever exist, what they were really fighting for was the little guy who depends on the sales of their music to continue doing it. But South Park sure did have a fun time making fun of them. But behind the scenes at Metallica Incorporated, it wasn't all sunshine and roses either. Lars and Hetfield had begun having families, and would take some time off from making music. But Jason Newsted said long ago that his only passion in life is making music, and if Metallica was gonna take gaps between gigs, he wanted the opportunity to go out with his side project band, Echo Brain. But Hetfield refused this, saying that if Newsted went with a different band, it watered down the Metallica brand, and was almost like cheating on them. This resulted in Jason Newsted deciding to leave Metallica. The aftermath of that decision would be chronicled in the hit documentary, Metallica, Some Kind of Monster, which followed the band as they set out recording their new album, Saint Anger, while producer Bob Rock stepped in bass duties before the band would hire Suicidal Tendencies bassist Robert Trujillo as their next bassist. This documentary was directed by the Paradise Lost filmmakers, so, it's good, and would gain notoriety for its unprecedented look at the inner workings of the world's biggest metal band, including lead singer James Hetfield's struggle with alcohol addiction. This film, Some Kind of Monster, would win Best Documentary Feature at the Independent Spirit Awards, and would end up on a lot of lists of the greatest documentaries of all time, if you care about movie lists. The resulting album, Saint Anger, would be released in 2003 to less than stellar reviews, with many noticing the absence of Metallica's signature guitar solos, and for some reason the drums sounded like it was recorded in a f***ing toilet. But once again, I respect them for trying something new, and I do think Saint Anger gets a little more hate than it deserves. People are too angry at Saint Anger, and the album still managed a first-place opening, selling over 417,000 copies in its first week, and would ultimately win another Grammy for them, so there's that. Since the 1980s, the band Metallica has entered the stage to the iconic sounds of Ennio Morricone's Ecstasy of Gold, from the film The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So, when a tribute album was being put together for the legendary composer, Metallica would record a version of that song, which would result in the band receiving a Grammy nomination for Best Instrumental Performance. They would then get back to the studio to record their 9th studio album, Death Magnetic. The release would continue the band's record of debuting in first place, where it remained for 3 consecutive weeks, while most reviews called it a return to their thrash metal roots, and would ultimately net the band another 2 Grammy wins, with Best Rock Album and Best Recording Package. A follow-up EP was released titled Beyond Magnetic, featuring 4 previously unheard tracks. Of course, Metallica was not just sitting idly by. They would release a video game, Guitar Hero Metallica, to much acclaim, while on April 4th, 2009, the band would officially be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It would seem like the band was having so much fun touring the world that writing new music kind of became secondary to the thrill of performing live, which they did relentlessly. So yeah, Metallica was everywhere. In 2013, the band would star in a feature film called Metallica Through the Never. The 3D film was released on IMAX screens across the country, where it unfortunately tanked, with just $31 million made against a $32 million budget. But the Grammys gave it a nomination for Best Musical Film, so there's that. But it would be 8 long years until Metallica would release their next album. But for many, the wait was worth it, as Hardwired to Self-Destruct would receive nearly unanimous praise, with many calling the album a true return to their heavier roots. The album would mark the band's 6th consecutive #1 debut, and Hardwired to Self-Destruct would go on to win Album of the Year from Revolver Magazine, as well as Top Rock Album from the Billboard Music Awards, and be nominated for Best Rock Album at the Grammy Awards. Metallica would then head back on the road to do what they do best, perform live. And for the next 4 years, the band would again headline various stadium-filled events, including performing again with the San Francisco Orchestra, titled S&M 2. But sadly, in 2019, James Hetfield re-entered rehab to deal with his addictions, and many of Metallica's live shows were postponed in 2020, while the band stood in full support of their friend to get better. But of course, 2020 would come, and our dear trusted leaders shut the whole fucking world down, which means many more Metallica shows would get pushed back and or canceled. While performing sets in their studio to benefit their All Within My Hands Foundation, the band would begin formulating new material for their next album. And then, on November 28th, 2022, the band, without warning, dropped the track Lux Aeterna, while announcing their 11th studio album, 72 Seasons. The album, 72 Seasons, was released on April 14th, 2023, and would receive great reviews. The music critics would notice that James Hetfield's lyrics hit harder than some of his other lyrics in recent memory, as they focused on hard-hitting trauma, while mixing in genuinely moving poetry that brought together an album of rockin' speed metal that you don't see very much in today's world. And although Metallica's most recent album did not debut at number 1 in 20 different countries, it would actually debut at number 2 in the United States, which is still pretty good, but it would end the band's over 35-year streak of debuting at the top of the US charts. That's how successful Metallica is. When they debut at number 2, it's looked at as a failure. With the release of their newest album, which has already been certified gold, the band has embarked on their latest worldwide tour, the M72 World Tour, which will be going through September 29th, 2024. With tour reviews saying that Metallica is by far still the best band to see live. But Metallica has had a very recent comeback in a very unexpected way. Since all that 80s nostalgia is all the rage now, mostly thanks to Stranger Things, it was about time that this massive hit of a TV show featured some rockin' Metallica jams. And Season 4 did just that, in an absolutely amazing scene where Eddie Munson rocks out to Master of Puppets as those monster demon things are coming to get him. That scene would reignite the passion for many long-time Metallica fans, while introducing this iconic rock band to an entire new generation of fans. Which means Metallica will continue rocking our collective worlds as their music truly transcends generations. So nobody should give a fuck about what the fuck happened to Metallica, because they're still rocking and rolling, still doing just fine.
Dude, most metal ever!